Hi guys, welcome to today's session. So we're going to be carrying on with this mixed media piece, and today is the first day we're going to be painting, which should be fun. So the paint I'm using is just going to be some white acrylic paint. But you could use anything with yours. You could use any kind of water-based medium, tempera or watercolor, body color, that sort of thing. Anything like that will work well. But basically we want to start building up some of the tones, some of the lighter tones in the drawing, and we might do a little bit of overpainting with charcoal, but we'll see how things go. We're trying to kind of figure out the sort of limits, like how bright things are going to get and so on. So the first thing I'm going to do is this kind of napkin area is very white. So we can start, the letter on the napkin. So we can start with that and just see how bright it goes. I am using a little bit of water to thin the paint. But primarily I'm kind of going for more of a dry brush. So more like the paint out of the tube, just kind of thinly and dryly painted over. I don't want to build up or build too much water into the paint layer at this stage, just because it might make the paper buckle a bit, so I don't want to introduce too much water into the paper. The acrylic's going to be fairly transparent, so we'll do a few passes over. But there's an advantage to that transparency because it means you have a little bit more control over how the tone is going to build up. Whereas if it was kind of very opaque, obviously whatever we do So that's it for that letter. You'll notice I'm using a small brush, also gives a reasonable amount of control. There's a few other things that we can see here. So we've got this highlight on the metal is very bright, so we can go pretty much immediately to a reasonably strong dab of white paint there. And then the majority of this napkin is also pretty bright, although there are a few sections where you can sort of make out slightly less bright values. And we can also start to kind of give a bit of a sense of the form turning. So you can sort of see, say, this little section in here we can turn into a kind of little semi-half-tone shadow just by leaving it the color of the paper and not making it as bright as the rest of the napkin. And then in these folds we have little kind of tucked notes of light tones, some of which I can just paint directly over the dark. So then any of those parts where I want the paint to kind of build up a bit more thickly, I want the white to be brighter, I can just kind of layer over the top. Now, those bits are pretty definitely bright, but there are some other little parts which are perhaps more subtle. So there's things like these highlights on the bottles. Have a little kind of interesting shift in tone to them, so we want to give a sense that the the lighter tone is transitioning across. But we can be kind of moderately restrained. We're going to be doing another pass over with more white paint, kind of for final highlights, but at the moment we're just sort of feeling out where we need to go, where we can or where we need to go particularly bright. So we've got some things like highlights on this porcelain. So definitely need some more light tones on those. And obviously we've also got some pretty few bright tones on the bits of metal that we have as well. So we've got this knife handle, and the blade, which are also catching a little bit of light, and of course the silver tumbler as well. And less brightly, there are some portions which I'm going to sort of do just a bit thinner, sort of more glazed over, starting to kind of get into some of the little bits of brighter tone here and there in the metal, the reflective bits. And then also, again, not necessarily the strongest bright tones, but certainly this ham could do with some heightening, particularly sort of around the top portion here. We've also got this paper as well. And again, it's not sort of necessarily the brightest white tone, but some parts of it go pretty white. Sort of this edge where it kind of wraps over. Can leave out the text. That's probably something often a bit easier to apply sort of over the general form once the form is established. And the same goes for the tabletop. So most of the tabletop could do with just being washed over a little bit brighter. Just putting a little bit more white paint out. And then just trying to keep a reasonable consistency, so I want it to be thin enough, the paint, that it's spreadable. But not so watery that it kind of soaks the paper, so that's the sort of balance I'm going for. We also want a bit of a gradient kind of going back from the table, and possibly maybe also start to kind of give a bit of a suggestion of these little kind of creases in the cloth. Which are dotted around here and there. Yeah, so a bit of a gradient going back up the tablecloth towards the darker portions on the right hand side here is ideal. So that's not looking too bad. So the only thing you can do as a sort of final step at this stage is just anywhere you know that we're going to go super bright. So this letter, for instance, we'll work probably over the top in a slightly harder medium once it's dried. But that can go really, really pretty bright. We know that's going to be one of the brightest portions of the painting. So start to cake that on a little bit more, give it some even further body. Likewise, the kind of lighter portions of this napkin. That's just kind of pure paint out of the tube I'm working with. And as I say, you probably will need to do a few passes over your glass highlights as well, just because it's transparent, it takes a little while to kind of build the really bright tones up. Yeah, generally that's not looking too bad. So we'll probably leave it there for this week. It's a kind of natural finishing point. And we're certainly at a point now where we can kind of carry on working over this piece and start focusing sort of a bit more on smaller details. We have done a bit on detail, but not an enormous amount. So a bit on details, working with sort of smaller smaller points of charcoal, sharpened charcoal, maybe a little bit of graphite. But anything you can get your hands on really to mess around with this piece is totally fine. So it's a very open mixed media project in that sense. Put one final little highlight on this. Of that tumbler. But yeah, generally it's looking alright, I think. So this is the sort of stage you want to get up to with your painting before you would start to move into finer details. Partly we want to get some of these, we want to get these lighter tones in place, a few of them, before adding any detail, just because it gives us a sense of how accurate our relationships between tones are. But yeah, that's it for today. As always, you can follow the channel on YouTube to receive these videos, or to see these videos. And if you follow the link through, you can sign up for tuition from myself and other expert tutors. But yeah, that's it for this week, and I'll see you guys soon.